Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Egyptians extend their protest despite the military's warning. Syria slams Washington's provocative comments. And Israel passes boycott bill criminalizing opposition to the occupation. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
More than 5 months since they toppled Hosni Mubarak, Egyptians are back in the iconic Liberation Square. What has gone wrong with the Egyptian revolution? I'm Homa Lezgi, and this is another edition of News Analysis.
Tensions are running high in Egypt months after the January revolution put an end to the decades-long rule of former President Hosni Mubarak. The same protesters who brought down Mubarak say he and his henchmen must not be allowed to escape justice.
How can Hosni Mubarak be treated in 5- and 7-star hospitals and those who were injured during the revolution be thrown into pro bono hospitals and, what's more, kicked out of them? Is this acceptable? No, we are here for a just trial.
The protesters also demand that the Interior Ministry is yet to be purged of officials who backed tough police tactics against people during the January uprising. Under pressure to speed up reforms, the ruling military council has threatened it will not give up its role in running the nation's affairs. All measures have been taken to make the protesters get back home. Like the revolution days, intimidation tactics have been used to disperse the demonstrators who have been gathering in Cairo's Liberation Square, the cradle of the Egyptian uprising. The demonstrators have stood their ground. Steps have also been taken to placate protesters. Deputy Prime Minister Yahya al-Gamal has resigned following calls by the demonstrators to quit. Former Prime Minister Ahmed Nazif has received a 1-year suspended jail term for graft. 2 other ministers from the toppled regime have also been sentenced to prison in absentia. All this has failed to satisfy the protesters. Activists are pushing for a 1 million-man march in the Egyptian cities, including Alexandria and Suez. The coming days will be decisive for the majority of the Egyptians, as well as the ruling military council, which has been accused of sympathizing with Mubarak and remnants of his ousted regime.
In Germany, the government of Chancellor Angela Merkel has come under increasing pressure to call off selling hundreds of tanks to Saudi Arabia. Here's more on that.
Over the past week, Germany's politics has been rocked by reports of Berlin's approval of selling 200 Leopard 2 tanks to Saudi Arabia. Pressure is mounting on the government to cancel the secret deal, which was approved by Germany's Security Council. Reports say the government had obtained backing from Washington and Tel Aviv before finalizing the deal. The opposition Social Democrats Party has criticized the deal as both politically and morally indefensible, given Saudi Arabia's dire human rights record. They have insisted on details of the sale to be put before Parliament, pledging an all-out campaign against it. The controversial deal has also caused outrage among many ordinary Germans who believe it is in sharp contrast with Berlin's claims of having no extensive ties with autocratic regimes. Opponents of the deal say Leopard tanks are highly suitable for urban terrain and can easily be used by Riyadh to crush dissent inside and beyond its borders. This has alarmed rights organizations and activists, especially at a time when Saudi military forces and tanks have been deployed in Bahrain to help Manama crack down on peaceful anti-government protests. The brutal crackdown has left dozens of Bahrainis dead. Mecca's government has defended arms exports to Saudi Arabia as a measure to counterbalance the kingdom's power against Iran. This without explicitly confirming or denying the tank deal. However, some analysts say such claims are only aimed at convincing Iran's neighbors to place more orders with German arms manufacturers. Berlin has also sold Dolphin submarines capable of carrying nuclear warheads to Israel, despite its nuclear non-proliferation commitments. In spite of self-imposed restrictions, Germany's arms exports have doubled in the last decade. The country is now the world's third largest weapons exporter after the United States and Russia.
The Syrian Foreign Ministry condemned U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's comments on President al-Assad. The ministry stated that Clinton's remarks are provocative and constitute an interference in Syrian affairs. Clinton said al-Assad lost his legitimacy after a group of pro-Assad loyalists attacked the American and French embassies in Damascus.
For the first time since the outbreak of protests in Syria 4 months ago, the diplomatic tone between Damascus and Washington is noticeably tense. Also, for the first time, Washington directly said that President al-Assad has lost his legitimacy and that those who believe him to be indispensable are wrong.
Assad is not indispensable.
U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's comments came following the attack on the American and French embassies in Damascus. The Syrian response was swift and described Clinton's remarks as a provocative action that prolongs internal aggravation. The Syrian Foreign Ministry issued a statement confirming that the legitimacy of the country's political leadership is not based on the U.S. or others, but is derived from the will of the Syrian people. The statement added that relations between countries are based on the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. Damascus demanded that Washington and its envoys abide by that principle and refrain from any acts that could provoke the Syrian people's emotions. This is not the first instance in which Damascus uses provocation as a descriptor for American action. On Friday, the American ambassador to Syria visited the city of Hama as massive protests against the dialogue were taking place. In response, Syrian authorities said that Ford met with a number of saboteurs and his actions further destabilized the country. The scene is further complicated as Paris escalated its reaction to the events in Syria with attempts to take action against al-Assad's regime following its failure to protect diplomatic facilities on its territory.
We need international authorization to interfere, but the necessary conditions are not available for the UN Secretary Council to take a stand on the Syrian crisis. We are working for that aim at the Security Council. We are trying in particular to convince the Russians that it's not acceptable for the Security Council to let what's happening in Syria take place without reacting.
These protesters across Syrian cities wait to see if these efforts will actually result in a UN resolution condemning acts described by activists as grave human rights violations. Sally Nabil, BBC.
In Damascus, the consultative meeting that included a number of political and academic figures concluded. Its final statement indicated that dialogue is the only way to end the crisis rocking the country. The meeting recommended the establishment of a committee to look into redrafting the constitution and demanded the release of political detainees who have not committed any crimes. The statement also called for the establishment of a state of right, law, citizenship, pluralism, and democracy. These recommendations will be discussed at the National Dialogue Conference. The Syrian opposition refused to participate in the meeting.
The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, passed a law that imposes penalties on any Israeli company, individual, or group that boycotts products from the settlements in the occupied West Bank, or boycotts any cultural or educational organization there.
The law was passed by a majority of 47 members, with objections from 38 opponents. While the right-wing Israelis welcomed the law, its criticisers described it as undemocratic, saying that it's a mark of shame on the Knesset.
Our correspondent Elias Karram reports on the details of the new Israeli law.
A new law has just been added to Israel's law record. Many say that this law belongs with a series of racist laws that discriminate against Arabs and undermines the basis of democracy. The law, which criminalizes boycotting, is the brainchild of the Israeli right wing, supported by Benjamin Netanyahu's government. The law stipulates the punishment of any Israeli company, group, or individual that calls for and works to boycott products manufactured in settlements in the occupied West Bank, or to boycott educational and cultural organizations there.
The law defends the democracy that should not be turned into a weapon of prejudice by some, the right wing or the left wing. The law was in place to end the campaign of boycotts that caused major damages to residents in Judea and Samaria.
The law was passed despite the position of the Knesset's legal counsel, who said that the law has a constitutional defect. He said the law silences people and deprives them of their rights to protest and express opinions, especially the voices of peace groups, who see strengthening the economy and settlements as solidification for the occupation.
The law may infringe on the right to protest and express opinions against the inappropriate settlements.
This move is to glorify the status quo on Palestinian land. It is a blow to all Arab and international efforts for Israel to make progress with the peace process.
Penalties to be imposed on the boycotters include deprivation of government tax cuts and aid, a ban on competing in biddings, in addition to lawsuits against individuals. The law came as anti-occupation groups called for boycotting products from the settlements, and progressive Israeli actors and artists refused to perform there. In addition, the Palestinian Authority stipulated in its contracts with Israeli companies not to be linked with the settlements. The first action of protest against the passing of the law was initiated by the Israeli Peace Now movement, which built a page on Facebook encouraging boycotts. While one opinion says that the law fortifies Israeli democracy in the face of Israel's enemies, another opinion says that it is a mark of shame on democracy. In between the two opinions, the certain fact is that Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition is using the relative majority in the Knesset to pass laws that glorify the occupation and fight peace groups calling for the end of it. Elias Karram, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem. Ten Libyan revolutionaries were killed and over 20 others were wounded in a bombing by Gaddafi's battalions west of Misrata city. Revolutionaries said that Gaddafi's loyalist forces used Grad rockets to shell their strongholds west of Misrata, about 200 kilometers east of the capital, Tripoli. France said that the Western coalition asked the opposition and the Libyan regime to resort to the negotiation table to stop the military operations. Paris denied that it is conducting any direct negotiations with Tripoli, but said that it has sent letters to Gaddafi in order to reach a solution to the Libyan crisis.
As the war in Libya is prolonged, NATO member countries seem to be seeking an exit after their patience has run out and their forces exhausted by a war that has already cost billions of dollars. After 3 months of military operations, France said the international coalition will stop the bombing as soon as the conflicting sides in Libya start their dialogue. The UN Special Envoy to Libya expressed the same position and called on Gaddafi's regime and the Transitional Council to resort to a political solution and begin direct negotiations to settle the situation.
I'm urging the parties to
increase their focus on working toward a political solution. We would like to see indirect negotiations evolve into direct ones. Enough Libyans have lost their lives, and it should be clear that any lasting end to the conflict will require a political solution.
The efforts to exit from the entrenched war in Libya, led by NATO countries, continue. There are talks about indirect negotiations between Tripoli and France, which have been denied by the latter. At the same time, France said it has sent letters to the Libyan regime, calling on it to conduct direct talks with the opposition. The Libyan Transitional Council welcomed this move, considering it a positive step towards a solution.
We believe that this initiative and statement, if true, is a positive step. In our opinion, France is a friendly country to us, and we want a ceasefire, but on the condition of the downfall of Gaddafi's regime and the end of Gaddafi's rule.
With repeated calls for resorting to dialogue instead of fighting, it seems obvious that the participating countries' capabilities are near exhaustion. Norway announced it will recall its 6 F-16 fighter jets on August 1st. Italy said it will withdraw its carrier Garibaldi. All these signs prove that the war NATO has been directing in Libya for months is close to another failure. It failed to achieve neither its announced goal of protecting civilians, nor its concealed goal of overthrowing Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi's regime to facilitate its access to the enormous oil wells under the ground of Libya.
The Taliban movement directed a painful blow to Afghan President Hamid Karzai by assassinating his younger brother in Kandahar. This comes as French President Nicolas Sarkozy is on a quick visit to Afghanistan, where he announced his country's readiness to withdraw a quarter of its troops from the country.
An Afghan official spokesman announced the death of Ahmed Wali Karzai at his home in Kandahar. He is Afghan President Hamid Karzai's younger half-brother and was killed in an operation whose causes remain undetermined. The Taliban movement claimed responsibility for the assassination, praising it as one of its biggest achievements since it announced the resumption of attacks last spring. A spokesman for the Afghan president confirmed the killer to be Ahmed Sardar, a bodyguard, and described him as being close to Ahmed Wali. The Taliban said it assigned the man to commit the assassination. Ahmed Wali, who is seen as a controversial figure, was the head of the Kandahar Provincial Council. His opponents accuse him of being a warlord and of being involved in drug smuggling and corruption. In another development, French President Nicolas Sarkozy made his third visit to Afghanistan since his election. He confirmed in a joint press conference with his Afghan counterpart at the French military base in Tora near Kabul that Paris will withdraw a quarter of its troops, nearly 1,000 troops, at the end of 2012. After offering his condolences to Karzai over his brother's assassination, Sarkozy said in front of a group of journalists that there was never any discussion to continue to station troops in Afghanistan indefinitely, and we should know how to end this war.
Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir confirmed that South Sudan's secession from the north does not signify an end to ties. He indicated that unresolved issues with the South will continue to be discussed, especially in relation to South Kordofan. In a speech to Parliament, al-Bashir announced a number of economic measures, including plans to launch a new currency, strengthen foreign partnerships, and implement development plans in Darfur.
خلوص حائف جهاز أمننا الوطني من أي حالة اعتقال سياسي.
Our government is keen not to curb freedom of speech. No one from today will be arrested for expressing his political views or dissenting against the government. To further express our sincere desire to initiate an atmosphere of free dialogue, I have asked for a review of the cases of those currently investigated. Those who have no association to terrorist groups or have not committed any violent acts will be released.
our top story, despite hours of talks, the Middle East Quartet failed to reach an agreement on how to restart the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process during their meeting last night in Washington. The Quartet could not even produce a unified statement on how to proceed. It is customary for the Quartet to release a joint statement following all meetings, and the fact that none was issued after this one underscored the slim chances of the peace process getting back on track anytime soon. The continued impasse deals a critical blow to diplomatic efforts to thwart Palestinian intentions to petition the UN for unilateral statehood in September. A senior U.S. official said that the Quartet members admit that there are significant gaps among the mediators and the parties themselves that have stymied progress. The official did not expand on what those differences include. Israel's economic ties with Egypt are deteriorating. That's the warning from Infrastructure Minister Uzi Landau today after the Egyptian pipeline that supplies natural gas to Israel and Jordan was sabotaged yet again overnight. At least 4 masked gunmen carried out the attack on the El Arish pipeline, which is located roughly 50 kilometers from the Israeli border. The perpetrators ordered the guards on duty to leave the terminal and subsequently blew it up. This was the second explosion in 2 weeks and the 4th since President Hosni Mubarak was deposed back in February. Landau stressed that electricity disruptions are not expected, as Israel maintains other energy reserves, but the price of electricity is expected to increase by some 20%. Israeli troops clashed with Palestinian and international activists today during a march through Hebron. Demonstrators from the Welcome to Palestine movement paraded through the West Bank town, waving flags and chanting slogans. The activists gathered at one of the entrances to the Old City, which has been closed by the army to protect the nearby Jewish settlement. One of the international protesters banged on the closed gate as security forces threw stun grenades to disperse the crowd. Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi today praised the latest round of nuclear talks with International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Yukio Amano. Salehi said that the two sides have reached, quote, very positive conclusions and have agreed to continue working on their remaining differences. Amano has repeatedly encouraged Tehran to increase its cooperation with the IAEA to help allay Western concerns about its nuclear program. But Iran's failure to comply with IAEA inspectors or to halt its uranium enrichment has led to 4 rounds of UN sanctions. Joining me now in the studio to discuss the Quartet meeting and other regional developments is spokesman for the Prime Minister, Mark Regev. Good evening, Mark.
Happy to be with you.
Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure.
We know that the Quartet didn't even manage to come up with a joint statement in the last few days regarding the peace process. What do you believe is the cause for the deadlock?
Well, the Quartet is meeting again today, and I don't want to preempt anything that they might or might not do. What is clear is the Israeli position. We want to see the immediate resumption of direct talks with the Palestinians. That's the only way to peace. That's the only way to reconciliation. All these ideas of going to the United Nations won't help peace. On the contrary, it'll hurt peace. Direct talks, there's no other way forward, and I call upon the Palestinians, return to the negotiating table.
Some have said, though, that if Prime Minister Netanyahu would come up with his own peace plan, a clear initiative to bring people back to the table, then the Palestinians would inevitably have to cave to international pressure to do so. Why hasn't the Prime Minister come up with his own plan?
On the contrary, we have. We've said, this Israeli government has said we're ready for substantive discussions on all the core issues to the conflict, all of them. Settlements, borders, legitimacy, security, Jerusalem, all the core issues to the conflict can be on the negotiating table. We're calling for direct negotiations between the leaderships of both sides. We want to move forward. The Prime Minister said we can do this within a year. Let's start.
The U.S. Defense Secretary expressed concern about Iran providing weapons to extremists in Iraq. He noted that the United States will act unilaterally to deal with threats from extremists if necessary. Panetta's statement came after his meeting with Iraqi officials in Baghdad and Erbil to discuss the issue of the U.S. military presence after 2011. Hazim Mahmoud reports from Baghdad.
Political and security leaders from the U.S. are flocking to Iraq. Newly appointed U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta was the most recent official seeking a response from Iraqi officials, most notably from Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, President of the Republic Jalal Talabani, and Kurdistan Regional President Masoud al-Barzani, to quench the U.S.'s thirst for its forces to stay in the country of the two rivers after 2011. Political observers speak of a compromise that will keep U.S. troops in the country and that does not embarrass the political groups that announce their rejection of the extension.
I believe there will be a compromise to solve the issue. The agreement will expire or be cancelled at the end of this year, and the U.S. will play a different role, acceptable to all political blocs, with an increased number of troops whose mission it is to train the Iraqi military forces.
In light of the popular movement, some political blocs believe that the Iraqi public should have the first and final say on the issue of extending the presence of U.S. forces, regardless of the positions of the government or political parties.
The political bloc should listen to the opinion of the Iraqi street. If they don't listen to the public's opinion, then I believe that the situation will take a different turn.
The bombing of the Green Zone by 6 rockets, which coincided with Panetta's visit to Baghdad, gave additional momentum to the U.S. in its pursuit to extend its forces' stay based on the deteriorating security situation in Iraq. The U.S. Defense Secretary asserted that his country will act alone, if necessary, against the extremists to whom Iran provides weapons, which led to the killing of a number of U.S. soldiers in June. The submission of the Prime Minister's report to Parliament regarding his decision about the U.S. troops' stay will begin the process for all political blocs to determine their positions on the extension of these forces' presence in Iraq. Hazim Mahmoud, Baghdad, Future TV.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.